They mocked the giant horse, until the day it knelt down and saved a man's life on the very morning of the wedding. The church bell struck 7 as Martha Henley swept flour from her kitchen table, the carved wooden horse watching from its place beside the window. September light slanted through glass that needed washing, casting shadows across the pine boards her father had planed smooth 15 years ago, when they'd claimed this quarter section outside Millerville. She lifted the wooden horse, no bigger than her palm, and turned it toward the light. Eric Lindgren had carved it from a scrap of oak, working evenings by lamplight through the long Dakota winter. Every groove in the mane showed the patience of his whittling knife. Every curve of the neck spoke of hours spent shaping something beautiful from nothing. Martha, her neighbor, Mrs. Garrett, appeared at the screen door without knocking. "That creature is in my vegetable garden again." Through the window, Martha could see Eric's draft horse, a massive Percheron mare, the size of a small barn, methodically eating the last of Mrs. Garrett's turnip greens. The 18-hand mare, her coat the color of winter wheat, her feathered hooves each the size of dinner plates. "I'll fetch her," Martha said, setting down the wooden horse. She stepped into the cool morning air, her boots squelched in the mud. The horse lifted her great head at Martha's approach, turnip leaves hanging from the corners of her mouth like a guilty child caught in the candy barrel. "Come on, Astrid." Martha took hold of the horse's leather halter, feeling the weight of the massive head in her hands. "You know better." The horse followed willingly, her hooves thundering softly in the mud. From Main Street came the sound of laughter, harsh and pointed. A group of men had gathered outside Kowalski's Mercantile, pointing and snickering at the sight of Martha leading the giant horse. "Look at the size of that beast," called out Tom Bradley, the bank manager. "What's a body supposed to do with a horse that big? Can't hardly fit through a barn door." "Eric Lindgren thinks he's running some kind of circus," added Pete Dawson, the telegraph operator. "Brought that horse all the way from Minnesota, I heard. Paid good money for it, too." Martha felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept walking. The horse's breath was warm on her shoulder, steady and calm despite the voices. "Waste of feed," someone muttered. "Horse that size could eat a man out of house and home." She led Astrid to the small paddock behind her house, where Eric had built a shelter large enough to accommodate the mare's exceptional height. The horse went willingly into the enclosure, immediately lowering her head to the water trough. The church bell chimed 8 times as Martha latched the gate. In 2 hours she would walk down Main Street in her grandmother's wedding dress, past the same men who mocked Eric's horse, past the women who whispered about his foreign ways and strange ideas. She touched the wooden horse in her apron pocket. In 2 hours she would become Mrs. Eric Lindgren, and this giant horse would be hers as much as his. But first she had to finish pressing her dress. The church bells struck 9 as Martha spread her wedding dress across the kitchen table, the white cotton still wrinkled from its years folded in tissue paper. Her grandmother's dress had been worn once in 1863, before Grandpa shipped out to Gettysburg. Since then it had been carefully preserved in cedar and lavender. She heated the iron on the stove, testing its warmth with a damp fingertip. The sizzle told her it was ready. As she pressed the bodice smooth, she heard hoofbeats on the road, not the thunderous gait of Eric's Percheron, but the lighter rhythm of a standard saddle horse. Through the window she saw Dr. Morrison dismounting at the Garrett house, his medical bag in hand. Mrs. Garrett met him at her door, gesturing frantically toward her husband, who sat slumped on their front porch. Martha set down the iron and stepped outside. "Mrs. Garrett? Is Mr. Garrett well?" His heart, Mrs. Garrett called back, her voice tight with worry. "Started acting up again this morning. Pain in his chest. Can't catch his breath." Dr. Morrison was already examining the older man, pressing his stethoscope to his chest. Mr. Garrett's face was gray, his breathing shallow. "I need to get him to my office," the doctor said. "But my horse won't carry double, and the wagon's over at the Peterson farm." Martha looked at Astrid in the paddock. The giant horse stood calmly chewing hay, her broad back easily wide enough to carry 2 men. "Dr. Morrison," Martha called out, "what if we used Eric's horse?" The doctor looked up, following her gaze. "That monster? She's too big. How would we even get him up there?" But Martha was already unlatching the paddock gate. She approached Astrid with the wooden horse in her palm, holding it where the mare could see it. The horse lowered her massive head, nuzzling the carved figure with surprising gentleness. "She's gentle as a lamb," Martha said, "and she's strong enough to carry a grown man without strain." Dr. Morrison shook his head. "I don't know, Martha. That's a lot of horse." The church bell chimed 9:30. Martha's wedding was scheduled for 10 o'clock, but Mr. Garrett's breathing was getting worse. "Help me get him on her back," Martha said, leading Astrid from the paddock. "I'll hold her steady." It took all three of them working together, Dr. Morrison lifting, Mrs. Garrett supporting, and Martha steadying the horse, but they managed to get Mr. Garrett seated on Astrid's broad back. The horse stood perfectly still throughout the process, as if she understood the gravity of the situation. Martha handed the wooden horse to Dr. Morrison. "Show her this if she gets spooked. She's trained to it." "What about your wedding, Mrs.?" Garrett asked, suddenly realizing what time it was. Martha looked at her dress, still half-pressed on the kitchen table. "Mr. Garrett comes first." She watched as Dr. Morrison led Astrid down Main Street, Mr. Garrett swaying slightly but secure on the horse's back. From the Mercantile she heard Tom Bradley's voice. "Well, I'll be. Look at that horse go. Smooth as silk." The church bell struck 10 times as Martha returned to her kitchen, alone. Martha sat at her kitchen table, her wedding dress half-pressed before her, listening to the church bell mark the hour she should have been married. Through the window she could see the small crowd that had gathered at street marks beginning to disperse, their Sunday-best clothes bright in the morning sun. She picked up the wooden horse from the table, turning it in her fingers. Eric had carved it during their long courtship, working on it by lamplight while she read aloud from her father's books, Shakespeare and Dickens and the agricultural papers that came by mail from Minneapolis. Each evening a little more of the horse emerged from the oak, as if it had been waiting there all along, footsteps on her porch. Martha looked up to see Eric in the doorway, still wearing his wedding suit, a dark wool coat he'd bought special from the catalogue, with a white shirt that made his blue eyes startling in his weathered face. "The service," he said simply, his accent making the words careful and precise. "People are asking." Martha set down the wooden horse. "Mr. Garrett took ill. His heart. Dr. Morrison needed Astrid to carry him to town." Eric's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "And you gave her to him." "She was the only horse strong enough," Martha said. "The only one gentle enough." He stepped into the kitchen, removing his hat. His light hair was combed back with pomade, still neat despite the morning's events. "The wedding can wait. There will be other Sundays." "But people will talk," Martha said. "They're already saying we're strange, with your big horse and your foreign ways." Eric pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, his large hands resting on the table. "Let them talk. In Sweden we have a saying, 'The tree that grows tallest catches the most wind.' People mock what they don't understand." Through the window they could see Astrid returning, Dr. Morrison leading her at a walk. "Mister?" Garrett was no longer on her back, which Martha hoped was a good sign that he was stable enough to walk into the doctor's office under his own power. "She's a good horse," Martha said, watching Astrid's steady gait. "She is more than that," Eric said quietly. "In the old country they bred horses like her for the kings, strong enough for knights, gentle enough for children. When I bought her, the seller told me she had what they call the noble heart." He reached across the table and took Martha's hand. "I see the same heart in you." The wooden horse sat between them on the table, its painted eyes catching the light. Martha realized that in the moment she'd offered Astrid to help Mr. Garrett, she'd made her choice not just about the horse, but about the kind of person she wanted to be, the kind of wife she wanted to be. "The dress is only half-pressed," she said. "Then we'll finish it together," Eric said. "And when you're ready, we'll try again." Through the window they watched, as Mrs. Garrett came running from the direction of town, her face bright with relief. She waved toward Martha's house, calling out news they couldn't quite hear from inside. But Martha understood. The horse had helped save her neighbor's life, and sometimes that mattered more than what people said. The church bell chimed 11 as Mrs. Garrett burst through Martha's screen door without knocking, her face flushed with running. "He's going to be fine," she gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Dr. Morrison says it was just strain, not his heart giving out." And Martha, That horse of Eric's, she was steadier than any trained medical horse he's ever seen. Eric stood from the table, relief visible in the set of his shoulders. "This is good news." "More than that," Mrs. Garrett continued, catching her breath. "Half the town saw how calm she was, how careful. Tom Bradley from the bank was saying he's never seen such a gentle giant. Said maybe there's more to that horse than meets the eye." Through the window, Martha could see Astrid in the paddock, methodically working her way through a pile of hay. The morning's emergency seemed not to have affected her at all. "There's something else," Mrs. Garrett said, lowering her voice. "Pete Dawson at the telegraph office just got word from Minneapolis. Big storm coming down from Canada. Worst blizzard in 10 years, they're saying. Expected to hit tomorrow night." Eric's face grew serious. "How bad?" "Bad enough that they're calling all the farmers in from their outlying claims. Doc Morrison's worried about folks getting caught in the open." "Mrs." Garrett looked at Martha's half-pressed wedding dress on the table. "Reverend Hayes says he can perform the ceremony this afternoon if you're willing, before the storm hits." Martha felt the wooden horse in her palm, smooth from handling. The morning had already shown her something about Eric. She'd only suspected that he was the kind of man who put others' needs before his own pride, who understood that a wedding was less important than a neighbor's welfare. "What do you think?" she asked him. Before Eric could answer, the sound of rapid hoofbeats came from the road. Pete Dawson himself appeared, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Eric! Martha!" he called out. "Emergency at the Peterson farm. Their barns caught fire, and they can't get their cattle out. The animals are spooked by the flames, won't come near the door." Eric was already reaching for his coat. "How many cattle?" 20 head, maybe more. Tom Peterson's beside himself. "Says the smoke's getting worse, and the cattle are pressed against the far wall." Martha looked at Astrid in the paddock. The horse was watching them with interest, as if she sensed something important was happening. "Astrid could help," Martha said suddenly. "Cattle trust horses, especially calm ones. If Eric rode her into the barn, led the cattle out." "That's a powerful, dangerous idea," Pete said. "Fire and spooked cattle." "She's been trained for heavy work," Eric interrupted, understanding immediately. "In Minnesota, we used horses like her for timber rescue. She won't spook." The church bell struck 11:30. Martha made a decision that surprised even her. "Go," she said to Eric. "Take her. I'll finish pressing my dress and meet you at the church when you get back." Eric looked at her with something like wonder. "You're certain?" "I'm certain." She handed him the wooden horse. "Show her this if she needs calming. And Eric, be careful." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a promise and a blessing combined. "When I come back, we'll be married before this storm hits." Martha watched as he led Astrid from the paddock and swung up onto her back with surprising grace for such a large horse. They rode toward the Peterson farm at a ground-covering lope, Eric's wedding coat dark against the horse's wheat-colored hide. The church bell chimed noon as Martha turned back to her wedding dress, knowing she was marrying exactly the right man. The church bell was striking 2 o'clock when Martha heard the thunder of hooves on Main Street. Through her kitchen window, she saw Eric riding Astrid toward town, both of them covered in soot but moving steadily. Behind them came Tom Peterson on his own horse, and behind him a line of cattle walking calm as Sunday churchgoers. Martha smoothed her pressed wedding dress one final time and pinned her grandmother's veil to her hair. The torn edge caught the afternoon light, but she'd mended it with careful stitches that morning. Some repairs, she'd learned, made things stronger than they'd been before. She was pinning the wooden horse to her bodice as a brooch when Mrs. Garrett appeared at her door again. "Martha, honey, you need to see this." Outside, a crowd had gathered on Main Street. Not the mocking voices from the morning, but something different, people pointing and talking in tones of genuine admiration. Martha could see Tom Bradley from the bank shaking Eric's hand, and Pete Dawson taking notes as if he meant to telegraph the story to Minneapolis. 20 head of cattle, Mrs. Garrett was saying as they walked toward the church. Eric rode that horse right into the burning barn, calm as you please. The cattle followed her out like she was leading a parade, Tom Peterson saying she saved him from bankruptcy. At the church steps, Martha could see Reverend Hayes in his black coat, prayer book in hand. A small crowd had gathered, not just the usual wedding attendees, but half the town, drawn by the story of the horse that had helped save 2 emergencies in one day. Eric dismounted from Astrid and walked toward Martha, his wedding suit smoky but his blue eyes bright. In his hand he carried the wooden horse. "I believe this belongs to you, Mrs." "Lindgren to be," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Not yet," Martha replied, smiling. "But soon." The crowd parted as they walked toward the church, Martha's white dress bright against the afternoon shadows. But as they reached the steps, she heard the distant rumble of thunder. Not the ordinary thunder of summer storms, but something deeper, more ominous. "Storm's coming faster than expected," Reverend Hayes said urgently. "We'd best get you 2 married quick, before it hits." Inside the church, the ceremony was brief but complete. Martha spoke her vows with the wooden horse pinned to her dress, Eric's voice steady as bedrock when he promised to love and protect her. When Reverend Hayes pronounced them man and wife, the whole congregation erupted in genuine celebration. But as they stepped outside, the first snowflakes were already falling. "Blizzard's here," Pete Dawson called out from across the street. "Gonna be a bad one." The wind was picking up, and Martha could see the concern in people's faces. In a Dakota blizzard, people could get lost between their front porch and their barn. Neighbors could freeze to death 100 yards from safety. "Folk need to get home," Eric said, and fast. But as they watched, old Mr. Garrett stumbled on the church steps, still weak from his heart episode that morning. "Mrs." Garrett tried to steady him, but the wind was growing stronger, and Martha could see they'd never make it the 1/4 mile to their house on foot. Without hesitation, Eric brought Astrid to the church steps. The big horse knelt, lowering herself, so that Mr. and Mrs. Garrett could climb onto her back. "She kneels?" Martha asked, amazed. "Trained her myself," Eric said with pride, "for loading heavy timber." The crowd watched in wonder as the giant horse rose smoothly to her feet, carrying the elderly couple as gently as if they were made of glass. Eric walked beside her, guiding her through the increasing snow toward the Garrett house. Martha followed, her wedding dress bright against the darkening sky. Behind them came half the town, all of them understanding they were witnessing something remarkable, not just the marriage of Martha Henley and Eric Lindgren, but the acceptance of something they'd mocked that morning. At the Garrett house, Astrid knelt again, letting her passengers dismount safely at their front door. As the couple disappeared inside, Tom Bradley stepped forward from the crowd. "Eric!" he called out over the wind. "That's the finest horse I've ever seen." "Noble as a knight's charger." "She is what she is," Eric replied simply, "strong and gentle and true." Martha felt the wooden horse against her heart, warmed by her body through the wedding dress. As Eric helped her onto Astrid's back for the ride home, she understood that some things couldn't be judged by their size or strangeness. Some things had to be measured by their heart. The giant horse carried them home through the beginning blizzard, steady as a ship in storm, patient as love. The blizzard raged for 3 days, but Martha and Eric weathered it snug in their small house, with Astrid safe in her oversized shelter. When the snow finally stopped and the sun came out, they found a changed world, not just the white-covered landscape, but something different in how their neighbors looked at them. Tom Bradley came by on the 4th day with a business proposition. The railroad was looking for reliable freight horses, and he'd recommended Astrid for a trial contract. "Good money," he said, "for a horse that could handle heavy loads without spooking." Mrs. Garrett brought them a basket of preserves and a formal apology for her husband's harsh words about foreign ways and circus horses. She'd seen with her own eyes, she said, what kind of heart beat in that big chest. Martha kept the wooden horse on her kitchen windowsill, where it caught the morning light. Some evenings she'd hold it while Eric told her stories of Sweden, of the great horses that carried kings, and the careful hands that carved their likenesses from oak and memory. The town had mocked the giant horse, but in the end she'd knelt to the bride and carried her home, carried all of them home in one way or another to a place where size mattered less than heart, and strangeness was just another word for strength they hadn't learned to recognize yet. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while, I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.